Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the Majestic Masiakasaurus YouTube channel. It's great to have you here. Obviously you saw the title and you know what this is going to be about, and if you know anything about this channel, you'll know that this is something new for me as well. It's not a reaction video, it's not a more methodical response, and it doesn't pertain to dinosaurs, flat earth, or other bad science. Religion and atheism are not things I've talked about on this channel before, nor really in real life with very many people, including my family, most of which are not atheists. But it's about time that I did. So whatever religion you're a part of, I'm not going to try to convince you of anything in this video. Rather, I'm just going to tell you my story and clarify what it really means to be an atheist. So let's get started. I was raised in the Mormon Church, or what's more correct these days, I was raised a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mostly. Most of my family are indeed members of the church, but just a few have left, giving me an unusual experience most kids don't have when it comes to religion, being exposed to a bit of two very different viewpoints. I can't remember ever really loving church on Sundays, to be fair. I really loved seeing all my friends from the neighborhood, but it was sometimes kind of boring, and there were also just questions that I never got satisfactory answers to. Stuff as simple as, who created God? Or, why can't girls hold the priesthood? Then I began to learn some other interesting things about religion in general. For example, I learned that Catholics literally believe that the bread and wine that they drink in the sacrament actually become the body and blood of Christ, which I thought was kind of weird. But then one of my Sunday school teachers told me that Catholicism is the next closest religion out there, second to Mormonism, of course. Another example, I first heard the classic question regarding omnipotence, which was, could God create a rock so heavy he could not lift it? Whether you answer yes or no, the answer seems to point that he wouldn't actually be omnipotent, but I had always been taught that God was. I learned about the degrees of glory, that heaven was divided into ranks and we're all striving for the top rank, the celestial kingdom. But some of my family and friends weren't Mormon, didn't go to church, so what was going to happen to them? I learned that Joseph Smith, the first modern prophet, translated the Book of Mormon using the Urim and Thummim, a pair of glasses and a magic rock. I learned that when my parents were growing up, no one with dark skin was allowed to hold the priesthood or go to the temple, for example. But now they can, so how could God change his mind? I also learned that the church actively opposed LGBTQ rights and was anti-gay marriage. By this time, I held the priesthood, the literal power of God manifested here on earth, and had some pretty serious doubts about fundamental teachings of the church, but was by no means an atheist yet. However, I knew I wanted to stop going to church even before I would have called myself an atheist. Why? Probably had to do with my issue with the church's stance on gay marriage. I realized that I not only didn't believe some of what the church taught, but that I actually disagreed with the church on some pretty important stuff. To rectify this, I realized I only had three options. 1, God isn't actually a homophobe and agrees with me on LGBTQ rights, but then the prophets of this church don't speak for him, in which case the church isn't true and I don't want to go anymore. Second option would be, maybe God just doesn't exist, but in that case clearly the church isn't true and I don't want to go anymore. Or my third option is the prophets do speak for God, but he's homophobic, in which case even if the church is true, I don't want anything to do with it, because I somehow hold myself to a higher moral standard than God, and I don't want to go to church anymore. This line of reasoning gets even stronger when you remember that the church withheld rights from African Americans in the past, and still don't let women hold the priesthood, which means they can't hold any of the highest positions in the church. And yes, just like all you other Mormons out there, I've heard all of the same women in the priesthood talks, just like you have, that try to get around this by saying that women are necessary to support men in their responsibilities through other callings, etc., etc. But is that really a satisfactory answer? It's just the separate but equal reasoning all over again, and it's sexist. I can't find a justification for that. Well, after that, I did quite a bit more researching on the topic of God and religion in general. I kept going to church, usually. I watched debates online between theists and atheists. I learned more about different religions through a world religions class at school taught by our interfaith chaplain. And I started reading something called the CES Letter, which I'd highly recommend any members of the church or anyone else interested in learning about its history to check out, so that'll be linked in the description. And frankly, it did not take long to arrive at atheism. And here I am. So what is atheism? I don't believe there is a God. The subtlety is that's different from believing there is no God. A couple of videos back, I talked about flat Earth, the burden of proof, and true skepticism, and I said that there was another example of skepticism I would talk about in the future. Well, this is it. Hopefully, even if you don't agree with my conclusion by the end of this video, you'll really grasp the concept of skepticism. To help explain this, I'm going to first talk briefly about fairies. Yeah, fairies. Do you believe that fairies exist? I hope not. Neither do I. But what if I were to ask you to disprove the existence of fairies? Could you do it? Well, you might do well to point out that, just like the Loch Ness Monster, all reported sightings or photos of fairies have other, better explanations. For example, perhaps the most famous images of ostensibly real fairies, dubbed the Cottingley Fairies, were taken in 1917 by two young girls, Frances Griffiths and Elsie Wright. 40 years later, after the photos had become very popular and had even been used by the famous author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as evidence of psychic phenomena, both women, although they still believed in fairies, admitted that the photos had been faked. But does that really disprove fairies? Well, you could probably do all of that over and over again for every other photo and sighting and first-hand anecdote, but that still wouldn't conclusively disprove the existence of fairies. Even though it seems extremely unlikely, there's always the possibility that they only exist on the one island in the Antarctic we haven't found yet, or that they immediately become invisible upon sight like a crazier version of Schrodinger's cat, or something. But does that mean we must all just assume fairies exist? No, absolutely not. We can be skeptics. Skepticism is a default to doubt. It's a withholding of any active belief on a subject you're unsure about. It's a passive position. Just like if you're somehow not convinced that the Earth is round, you don't then immediately believe the opposite, that it's flat. If you're not convinced that fairies exist, you don't immediately then believe the opposite, that they must not exist. Instead, I'm skeptical. I can't say for sure fairies do not exist, as that is an active claim and one I literally cannot prove, but I can say I don't believe they exist, just because it seems so unlikely. If you didn't catch it, I highly recommend you check out my previous video on skepticism with relation to flat Earth. I am a fairyist, a unicornist, and a ghostist, the same way that I am atheist. I won't try to prove that God does not exist, but given the amount of different ways that people have tried for thousands of years to prove that he does exist, in comparison with the amount of arguments that are logically sound and compelling, 0, I'm not convinced. That's atheism. This is why Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous and adamant atheists, rated himself a 6 out of 7 on a non-belief scale. So there is indeed a bit of agnosticism built in to atheism. The difference is, of course, that I don't believe it's a 50-50 chance. Just like I find it extremely unlikely that fairies exist, same goes for unicorns, ghosts, and God. However, with that all said, and now that hopefully you're convinced that it's impossible to disprove the existence of anything, I'm going to make a slight exception. The God I've spoken of so far is the God of deism, famously the preferred God of many of the United States' founding fathers. A deistic God is one which created the world, but no longer intervenes or perhaps doesn't even care about the happenings of humanity or anything else within the universe. This God may have even died or ceased to exist. The catch, however, is that most popular religions of the world add much more detail to their idea of God. Thus we get theism, which proposes a God who is the only of their kind in the universe, the creator of the universe and everything within it, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, eternal, and very much interested in your life, probably even your thoughts. This is the God of the Abrahamic religions, that of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And this is a God which I actually can quite easily disprove because of the fantastic characteristics ascribed to it, namely omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. I won't really go into this now, but the problem of evil, simply the fact that bad stuff happens in the world, quite easily disproves the idea that you can be all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. Thus, interestingly enough, we can actually dismiss the idea of any theistic God with those 3 traits. I wrote an essay on that whole topic, which I'm actually pretty proud of, so a link will be in the description for that as well if you're interested. Finally, I need to acknowledge that the LDS Church, along with every other organized religion, undeniably does good things. I love the tight-knit community of our ward family, for example. Then again, I have a close group of friends at school, too. I really like that the church teaches not to do drugs or use other harmful substances. Then again, there are plenty of better reasons to do or not do something other than just God said so, and I've learned much more about health, drugs, sex, safety, all of that at school than I've learned from church. I highly approve of the church's charitable side, which aims at helping those in need. Then again, I can donate whatever amount of money I want to other charitable organizations aimed at accomplishing projects I feel are particularly meaningful to me. Religion can be helpful, but as far as I can tell, it's also unnecessary, especially when you remember that the church undeniably has also done harmful things with its power and influence. Now, while maybe some of the questions I raised earlier from my own journey might get you thinking, and I hope that they do, none of this was really an attempt to try to convince you, as I obviously haven't tackled any of the reasons, the many, many reasons, that people do actually believe in God. Rather, I just wanted to clarify the meaning of an atheistic position, as I'm afraid it's quite misunderstood, and I also wanted to just get out my opinions and current thoughts on what I believe is quite an important topic. So what is the takeaway from this video? Well, I think it's as simple as this. Please think for yourself. The vast majority of people continue with the same religion as their parents, and that makes sense. If you're raised with all your family around you who all have the same mindset when it comes to God and religion, then why would you ever have any reason to believe differently? But no matter your current views on God, you have to agree that there's so many religions out there, and most of them have to be wrong. So then why would you just take the one that you happen to be familiar with? If God exists, this is unquestionably the most important decision we all have to make, and it absolutely deserves some dedicated, unbiased thought. Stay skeptical, think rationally, listen to differing viewpoints, and then make your own informed decision. I did, and arrived at atheism. I would implore you to do the same. Not necessarily to be an atheist, but to spend time thinking about it. Right now, thanks to the coronavirus, we live in a time of huge uncertainty, and it is more important than ever to calm down and think. I have a feeling you've got plenty of free time to try it out. Thanks so much for watching this video all the way through if you did. As always, please like the video if you did like it, and consider subscribing to the Majestic Masiakasaurus YouTube channel. I have so many ideas for stuff I want to do on this channel, so stay tuned. Thanks again, y'all. Stay home, stay safe, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Peace out.